and then it runs itself. And that's another reason why it's very low cost.
Well, that's what I was saying. At one point you said the NGO is lending out at X rate. It's like, well, the NGO is not lending out, right? The VSL is lending out. The NGO is just advising the VSL, right?
The NGO won't lend out, neither will the VSL. I might have been talking about the MFIs are loaning out at a certain rate, and said NGO. Excuse me for the, if I said that. So one of the principles is being able to save all the time, right? The second principle is borrow when you need it. So it's not necessarily on a set rate. It's very similar to things that you would want to do. You have access to these funds when you need them, not at a certain specific time, and pay when you can. So this idea of pay when you can is obviously within a schedule, but the idea is that basically each month it's not on a quota level. So for example, here, if you have a car payment that's $500 a month, you pay $500 every month. Well there, the idea when we use the VSL is, in 3 months you have to have paid $1,500. Not that amount, but we'll use that number. 3 months you have to pay $1,500. Now what does that mean? That means you can pay $1,000 today, and then you don't pay anything next month, and then in 3 months you pay $500. Or it could mean that you don't pay anything for 3 months and pay $1,500 at the end. So the idea is to work within the flexibility of, say, an agricultural system, to work within the flexibility of someone who has these different products to be able to pay back at different rates, and to try to constrain those type of, or to give more flexibility rather. So where do they work the best? Really they work all over very well, but predominantly in rural areas. Why in rural areas? Well, because if you don't have any other options, and typically what happens in the developing world is that the farther you go from the capital, the more expensive it is for NGOs or MFIs to travel to those places. So what happens is that all of a sudden we have to make our interventions or our projects cheaper and cheaper as they grow farther away from the city. VSLAs work where credit demand is weak and debt service capacity extremely limited. So that just basically means that that people can borrow in small amounts. So the demand is weak just means that they can borrow in small amounts, but they can't borrow large amounts. Yes?
So do VSLAs give loans for things other than business?
Yes. And they would then decide, us as a membership, or as a General Assembly at this term, would decide for what we're going to give these loans. So say, for example, we would say, okay, we're going to establish 4 or 5 different criteria for giving loans. We're going to say that if it's for education, you can take a loan out. If it's for an emergency, you can take a loan out. If it's for investing in a business, you can take a loan out. So you establish these sort of parameters before you start. But each group does that according to their own. Yes?
Do you have any data on how the repayment rates compare to other MFIs?
Yes, actually, there was actually I don't know if you guys are familiar with CGAP, but it's a very well-known microfinance sort of a peer review type article, type journal, or organization rather. And they actually just published a paper on analyzing VSLAs versus some of the others. And really, what I guess I would say the single thing that makes the most difference, when you start looking at these, you're talking about, and I don't know what Grameen is, I think it might be a little bit lower, but in the mid to upper 90 percentile. So what does that mean? Well, and it's kind of hard to track, and I'd hate to say that it's 99%, because I don't think it is. More what ends up happening is, sort of like in a Grameen bank methodology, where if we have 5 people, right, that are all responsible for one loan. Well, if this one person defaults, then the other 4 pay it back, and that's considered paid. Well, really, that's not that loan isn't paid off. But in terms of percentage-wise, yes, there has been actually rather extensive work done on it, and it's just the same idea that if we own something, then we'll value it more. So, for example, if it's just like when you have to buy those brand new set of tires for your car, have to pay for something to get fixed, or this, that, and other, you all of a sudden value it more than otherwise. Let me actually speed through this in 2 minutes, and then we will, I don't want to keep you guys over. Okay, so here's an example of where this might work. Okay, so I feel like we've already talked about that. What they do, what they don't do. They don't provide large sums of capital. Obviously, this is organic. So there's sort of some numbers of where this methodology is working and through the different NGOs, with a total of about 2.2 million participants around the world. Some different countries. I'm not going to leave this with you guys to. And this is some of the performance data, which I don't really want to talk about much more of it, besides for the fact of the survival rate. So when we start talking about price, when we start talking about price and about how long these groups live and what it ends up looking like, in the Niger, for example, and in the case of CARE, where they're working with about 200,000 people, that 8-year survival rate of about 96%. What basically means these groups that were started 8 years ago now have lived on for about 96% of them. And 15 years old, 94% of these groups still function well with relatively little investment. Okay. So, and this is basically what we talk about is, like, what do these things do? Well, they have large increases in assets, mainly controlled by women. So what that basically means is that these groups are very successful at increasing the assets that women hold, because they're all women's groups. And before this point, in any type of microfinance institution, in some microfinance institutions, it's very typical for the man to be the one signing and taking out the paperwork. Improve nutrition. Obviously, we can manage our cash flow better. We can have better nutrition. Increase stability of our home enterprises, like this small business, very small business that we see over there. Improve social status and social capital, and improve intrafamilial relationships. So in terms of cost, just to go over this very quickly. So if we look at cost per client, and you compare the Africa numbers, you compare the Asian numbers to an MFI, microfinance client, or a VSL client. In this case, we'll take the differences are extreme. So that permits this type of methodology to be used in areas where the microfinance can't feasibly go. Okay, let me. Okay. So these are the things we've already talked about. But basically the idea is that we're building savings and not debt. We're building assets and not liabilities. They're very accessible, transparent, they're low cost, and very highly profitable to the membership. So none of the ventures go outside. Frequent opportunities to save and regular opportunities to borrow and repay in varying amounts. So some of the downsides that we have here is obviously a smaller pool of capital, because if it's coming from our savings and we save a couple dollars a week, then we're not going to be able to have